enough sitting there to be considered. And many of the people who have applied and haven't even received acknowledgements have contacted other members of the legislature. Mr. Speaker, one other issue that of course was brought up last year, and I'll table a letter from the minister to me about it, actually, from February 3rd. Actually, sorry, it's dated February 3rd, 2011. Is about the purchase of land of historical significance near the canal that the province has expressed an interest in, and we understand that negotiations have been underway for some time since then. So, Mr. Speaker, would the minister please advise the House the stage of these negotiations, because we understand that they may be stalled.
Of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, as I've mentioned in my last question, we're certainly working continuously to find good members to serve on the Commission. And again, I welcome your input on any good people that you think could serve there. And as far as that piece of land, we've had meetings jointly with HRM, and that dialogue is continuing as we look forward to finding a solution to that particular issue.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you will be to the Minister of Natural Resources. Mr. Speaker, in mid-November, I was part of a delegation to Ottawa that met with the Federal Minister of State for Transportation regarding the MV Minor, which is on the shores of the Scattery Island. The Premier was on that trip, as well as the member for Glace Bay. And I know that the Premier is aware of the importance of this ship's removal. It threatens to damage local sea life as well as the health and safety of people that live in the surrounding area. But to this date, Mr. Speaker, I have not yet to hear anything about the status of the ship's removal. The storm last week hit Cape Breton especially hard. Can the Minister of Natural Resources tell this House what the status of the removal of the MV Minor is?
Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, the Scattery Island area is an important wilderness protection area in our province, and we know around that island there is an important fishery, scallops and lobster and other species, and we're trying to do everything we can to protect it. We've had ongoing meetings with our federal counterparts. As you know, the province spent somewhere in the vicinity of $300,000 plus for an environmental cleanup and get any dangerous goods off of the ship. And we're committed to working with our federal partners, but in reality, it was the federal government that allowed this ship to sail. We're hoping that they'll have a policy in place to prevent any future accidents like this, but we're committed to trying to find a solution to this issue.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, there's been a lot of talk about what was and wasn't going to happen around the site to ensure that the MV Minor was not damaging the health and safety of people or the local sea life. Early this week, there were reports of oil leaking from the engines. Now, I've been out to the ship, and there was a large hole in its hull at that time, and it's gotten worse. Winter is fast approaching, and I don't know if the ship will survive another storm. It's falling apart. And on October the 7th, Mr. Speaker, the Premier committed to make sure the ship is quickly removed to avoid environmental damage. We have not yet seen any action, and time is critical. News reports indicate that there may be federal funding available for situations like the MV Minor. Has the minister pursued all avenues available to remove the ship? Has he worked with the federal government to come to an agreement on a course of action, or were the Premier's words in October empty?
Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our Premier has been very involved in on this file, and I'm going to ask him to reply to it.
Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, as you would know, this is a matter that I raised with our federal counterparts. I did so very early, and as the member knows, as he said, he was on the trip that we took in order to see Mr. Fletcher. We have been consistent in our insistence that the Department of Transport Canada, take responsibility, its responsibility for what has happened to the MV Minor. And I guess the question I have is that we're all in that meeting. The member made a specific suggestion to the minister, Mr. Fletcher, and asked that they put together resources to actually address this. We have received no reply. Perhaps the member has received a reply from his Conservative colleagues.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on his final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as the Premier of this province stated in October, I'll do whatever it takes. I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen. It's not going to be an environmental issue, and I'll look after it. Well, he hasn't done that. And now he's over there, Mr. Speaker, and yes, I was in that meeting. And you know the difference between with me in the meeting and him? I went there with a plan to try and make a solution rather than just going there. I've met with the Premier's office, I've met with the Minister's office, and I've talked to the Transportation Minister in Ottawa. Now, all that being said, it's about what's important for the people and the sea life of that area. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know the best time to get that ship removed was when it happened, but that hasn't happened. However, the Minister needs to, and the Premier needs to stop laying blame and get on with it. The structural integrity of the MB Minor has continued to deteriorate, and I'm sure of how that we all know the clock is working against us. It's working against the sea life there, and it's working against the people whose livelihood is involved. There is a simple question. Before it's too late, Mr. Speaker, will the Premier and the Minister agree to immediately present a plan for the removal of the MV Minor from Scattery Island, as he promised in October?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the reality is that a plan has been presented to the federal government. We have asked them to do what it was that they were responsible to do, Mr. Speaker, but they have not done that, Mr. Speaker. Can you imagine, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative caucus in this province trying to heap $23 million of cost onto the backs of the taxpayers of Nova Scotia instead of insisting that his federal colleagues do what they ought to do?
The honourable member for Cape Breton West. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You did throw me off there, you know. The Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage asked me to ask him a question. He asked me for a question before the Christmas break, and I am going to deliver. Mr. Speaker, recently CBC reported that the Atlantic Lottery Corporation is looking to expand into international markets. According to the reports, the ALC is interested in expanding to such places as Albania, Illinois, as well as other markets around the world. Mr. Speaker, has the Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage been briefed on this development? Does he have a complete understanding of what this will mean for Nova Scotians?
The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. In the dying days of the House. No question Nova Scotians have an interest in what Atlantic Lotto has been doing over the last number of years. We have an interest, like the other Atlantic provinces, to ensure that we can maximize the opportunities that we might have with our interest with ALC. So we're going to continue to ensure that our stakeholders and our our stakeholders at the table of ALC ensure that the best interest of Nova Scotians and the asset that we have in Atlantic Lotto is going forward in the appropriate way.
The honourable member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, after intense pressure from the Liberal caucus from Nova Scotians across the province, the government made a commitment that they would not venture any further into the world of online gambling. With ALC expanding to markets across the globe and to jurisdictions with very different laws and regulations on gambling, Nova Scotians have good reason to be concerned with the possibility that they may be moving away from that position. Mr. Speaker, has the Minister made it clear to ALC that regardless of what markets they enter, that Nova Scotia will not allow any proposals for online gambling expansion?
The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think the government has been very clear on where we want to see our gaming, or where gaming goes in Nova Scotia. We recently announced our gaming strategy earlier this year, and we really put that gaming strategy together with a lens of responsible gaming. We were the first jurisdiction in North America, if not in the world, to include in our gaming strategy a responsible gaming tool for VLTs in our province. That's a first, Mr. Speaker, of any jurisdiction. I think that's a commitment that Nova Scotians can recognize that the government's taking seriously some of the reductions or harm reductions tools that we will put in place here in Nova Scotia for those individuals who choose to use gaming as an avenue of their entertainment here in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, ALC is currently having trouble competing with online gambling operators, but this minister needs to ensure that Nova Scotians do not see government-sponsored online gambling develop here in the province, and this includes internet gambling as well as gambling on mobile devices. Mr. Speaker, let's be clear, the devastation which can occur with gambling on a computer in your own home is only increased exponentially with the portability and availability of gambling on mobile devices. Mr. Speaker, what steps has the minister taken to ensure that Nova Scotia keeps its commitment to stay away from online gambling in all its forms, whether on computers or mobile devices?
The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prior to us releasing our gaming strategy, we took a wide consultation of those individuals in the province who have an interest in gaming, not only from an entrepreneur side of things, but those individuals who use it, those individuals who might have had a negative effect of gaming, Mr. Speaker. We were proud of the consultation that we received. I'm a little perplexed about the Liberal Party's interest in responsible gaming. During that consultation, we asked both parties for their input. I have to acknowledge the Conservative Party forwarded some concerns that they have, but the Liberal Party chose not to take part in that consultation, Mr. Speaker. So we're going to continue to ensure that we make sure that the best interests of Nova Scotians are at heart when we do anything when it comes to gaming here in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier, and I'll give him one chance to guess what it's about. Mr. Speaker, in November 2010, the Premier supported the ferry service between Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island because he said it was a vital economic link between the two provinces. I agree, Mr. Speaker, but why wasn't that same logic used when it comes to supporting the Yarmouth Ferry, which brought millions of dollars into the economy of Nova Scotia?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, as the member opposite would know, first of all, I believe it's part of the constitutional responsibility of the country to ensure that that link remains, as I do believe that that is the case for the Digby Ferry. And as the member opposite would know, that is also funded in part by the federal government.
The Honourable Member for Yarmouth.
Mr. Speaker, in September of this year, the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism announced funding to CB Rail. The reason being because that piece of infrastructure was good for the economy of Cape Breton. Why wasn't that logic applied when it came to the Yarmouth Ferry?
Honourable the Premier.
In fact, we did apply the same logic to both situations. The problem was that one was a sustainable service, one that's going to lead to greater economic development in the area, and the other one had a diminishing return. Unfortunately, it was not meeting the objectives that would create more employment in the area, and so we came to the regrettable decision that $6 million a year that was growing every year to more money would be better used as an investment in economic development in the region.
The honourable member for Yarmouth on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, nobody can deny the economic importance of the Yarmouth Ferry. There's been studies on it. Yarmouth has lost our hotel. We're at the verge of losing another one. Tourism operators across the province have screamed their outrage on this and told the Premier how it has impacted their business. Again, we have this session of the legislature, the Premier willing to give between $50 and $90 million to Bowater. The reason being to support the economy of the South Shore. All we're asking on this side, Mr. Speaker, is why that same logic, investing in important pieces of infrastructure, investing in business, investing in economic engines, why that same piece of logic wasn't applied when it came to the Yarmouth Ferry, and why the Premier doesn't currently apply it right now. So my question to the Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage is, what is he going to do to preserve our heritage of having a ferry, our seafaring culture, and to help the community of Yarmouth?
Oral questions put by members to ministers has expired. I will now recognize the House Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would you please call Resolution 2886?
Resolution 2886. I will now recognize the honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and just so everyone is clear which resolution we are speaking on, it is Resolution 2886, and the operative clause is, therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House remind the Premier and the rest of the NDP caucus that the next time they go door to door for an election campaign, they are going to have to answer for their broken promises and for making life simply less affordable for Nova Scotians. Interestingly, today we had some business owners from Halifax in the East Gallery, and I took the opportunity to stop and to chat with several of those business owners. And one of them said to me, you know, I don't even know if I can continue doing business here in Nova Scotia. And he spoke to a couple of particular issues. One was the increase in minimum wage, which he says has decimated his bottom line. And the other is the increase in taxes. And he said, I just don't know why I'm still in business. He says he's going to have to open more locations just because his margins are smaller. And so as we begin discussion of this particular resolution, I just wanted to draw the members' attention to that particular conversation today, because I think it sort of underlines a dichotomy here. There's a dichotomy between what the NDP think they're doing and what everybody else knows they're doing. But if we look at in fact, their record of broken promises, it's pretty clear what they're doing. In the 2009 election, the NDP promised to bring change to Nova Scotia. Instead, they delivered more of the same. To get into office, the NDP made promises they could not keep, and they knew they could not keep. Let's look at that immoral tax on tax. In opposition, the NDP said the tax on gas was an immoral tax, and the result was that Nova Scotians were being taxed to death. But in government, the NDP failed to eliminate the tax they once called immoral, and in fact, they're making more money from the tax on tax because their HST increase and rising fuel prices. If we look at the issue of increasing the HST, we all remember that the debate when the leader of the NDP, the then leader of the NDP, promised that the NDP would balance the budget without increasing taxes. Talk about magical thinking. Pretty much everybody understood that was not going to happen, except for I guess some people who didn't mind if it happened, or who actually believed it. In government, the NDP has increased the tax we pay on everything by 2%. It applies to many groceries, gasoline, and many major purchases. And in fact, that speaks to what this particular business owner was talking about. He said, The increase in taxes is hurting his business. And he also went on to speak about municipal taxes. And there was a decision made here yesterday, or I guess a lack of a decision, because the government did not look at giving a pension holiday to the pension plan for the municipality. And the result is you and I and every person who lives here in HRM will pay higher taxes, and the businesses will too, to have to underwrite that solvency requirement that is really quite academic, unless we think that in some way HRM is going to go under and have to pay out all its pensioners at once. It doesn't make any sense. And during the election campaign, the NDP promised that they would keep ERs open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We all know that hasn't happened. We've seen the results. 2011 government report showed that ERs were closed for 18,920 hours, the equivalent of 788 days in 1 year under the Dexter government. And you know, in my own area, we're served by the Cobequid Centre. And residents there were told the Cobequid Centre was going to be open 24/7. Well, I can tell you it is not, because I was just there quite recently at 10 o'clock at night as they were shutting the doors. When in opposition, the NDP railed against merit pay. They decried the Tory practice of offering merit pay to civil servants while they slashed social spending. And they also complained about Tory attempts to hide merit pay facts. In fact, over the last year, the NDP paid more than $2 million in merit pay to civil servants while they slashed education and health budgets. They never explained why it was shameful for the Tories to do it, but acceptable for them. Like the Tories, they only released the information after a Freedom of Information request. And then we look at the IEF. Do you remember back when the then leader of the official opposition, now Premier, was in high outrage over the Industrial Expansion Fund? It's a pot of money that's controlled by Cabinet without oversight, lending rules, or safeguards. The opposition NDP complained about the Tory use of the IEF and even called it a slush fund. Well, guess what? Here we are. After 2 years of NDP rule, the Dexter government increased the IEF to more than $260 million, used it in more than any other government before them. More than 90% of IEF funds went to NDP ridings, and they didn't explain why it was acceptable for them to use the IEF more than any previous government in history. Whoops, looks like we have another broken promise. And then we'll look at the $1.4 billion deficit. The Dexter government appointed a committee to examine the province's finances. The committee concluded the province had a $1.4 billion deficit. And this deficit was used by the Dexter government as an excuse to increase everyone's taxes and more than 1,400 user fees. In 2011, the Dexter government announced a surplus of more than $700 million. The government appointed a committee to find a deficit that didn't exist, and they happily followed along. A $700 million surplus is proof their deficit was fake and their tax increases were unnecessary. And then we have whole tree harvesting. In 2010, the Dexter government promised to ban whole tree harvesting, a process that takes the limbs and trunks of trees that are knocked down. And this type of forestry makes it harder for the forest to regenerate. And you know, I remember going on a field trip, geez, I think it was back when I was in grade 12. And we were told that if you don't leave something in the ground, then you're going to have a problem regenerating. And all you have to do is go to a place like Haiti, where they have completely denuded parts of their land. You can see it from the air. You can see the delineation between Haiti and Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic is green from the air. Haiti is brown because they have literally burnt and harvested every single stick of wood in any way, shape, or form, and the result is the soil can't hold on to nutrients, you have erosion, you have landslides. So here we are in 2011 when the Dexter government announces its natural resources strategy. The strategy didn't follow through on their government's promise to protect our forests by banning whole tree harvesting. The Dexter NDP has little concern for Nova Scotia's forests. I have half a minute left. Well, I'll just briefly sum up a couple of other issues. The closed and secretive government that we now have. When they were in opposition, the NDP complained about conservative secrecy, and they had issued freedom of information requests. After taking office, what we've seen is that Premier Dexter has assembled a group of unelected individuals that have power over his cabinet. This group...
Time allotted has elapsed. I would remind members that not to use the terminology of Premier Dexter. I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Madam Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to speak to this resolution because once again it is an example of a resolution which is taking a very small slice of time in an overarching global trend and suggesting that all of the difficulties which arise in that period of time have arisen specifically at the beginning of that time. We are, I think it is reasonable to say, dealing with very significant global forces at this point, which indicate that Nova Scotia is, like no man, not an island. We are working, however, to stabilize the vulnerability which past practices have brought to us in a variety of ways. And when this resolution speaks to increasing taxes, gas rates, energy costs, and food costs, it's very interesting that these are the things which are singled out, because all of them are, in fact, deeply dependent upon matters which are not entirely within the purview of the province. We have been working to deal with a $1.4 billion debt, and that is a fundamental promise which has been sets out to liberate us from almost $44 million of interest payments a year. And the simple measures, the small measures which we have been undertaking towards this are in some degree towards reducing expenditures and in others towards increasing the return to taxpayers of public funds. We have, as promised, ended the year-end spending splurges in which monies which had come into the general coffers were simply dispersed because they were there for no other reason than to continue to claim territory. And this return of money to the general coffers means that it is available to lessen tax demands on the public at large. We have done this very successfully. At the same time, we will be raising, or have raised, the personal tax exemption by $250 per person, every taxpayer in Nova Scotia, and have increased the child tax benefit by 22% per child per month. As well, we've instituted a rebate of the HST, which brings the amount of HST which would be paid up to that amount which could be expected for somebody at the low income level, cutoff level. We've instituted an affordable living tax credit, and surprisingly, apparently, we have also lowered the small business tax rate, so that although unfortunately we hear that small business owners and taxpayers feel that they are unable to continue business in the province, it is certainly not because of an increased business tax rate, although it may perhaps be because of an expectation that minimum wage, which means the delivery, the actual transfer of value from a tax-paying enterprise to the individual citizens, is in fact at an increased level. And that, surprisingly enough, also decreases the general tax burden on the province, because when people are able to make ends meet, there is less of a demand for the public to help them make ends meet. Another thing that we're doing Another thing that we're doing, and I'm not going to elaborate on this because we hear about it a lot in this chamber, is working to keep young people and working people in this province to increase the tax base from which we can, in fact, provide the services that government does try to provide and is expected to provide. We're working to create good jobs and to make the best of the educated populace and the resourceful populace that we have. And we are working to return as much, to keep people, graduate retention rebates, keep people in the province as well. We're working to strengthen our university institutions and post-secondary institutions as well. We're also, and this is a small sideline of this, we have enabled social assistance recipients to keep more of their earned income. I personally find it very unfortunate that the working poor need to rely on the government for the supplement of their earned income, but at this point that's how it is, and perhaps that's another thing which an adequate minimum wage would help to address, thereby reducing the tax burden on all Nova Scotians. One of the other things which we find ourselves facing, of course, and the other three things which have been mentioned are all functions of energy costs. It has been noted before in this chamber that we seem to be at a point of peak oil and have been headed in that direction for a long time. We're aware that there has been a significant loss of local producers of food over the last few years. The hog industry has essentially been I won't say torpedoed, but lost. We have lost food processors in food and poultry at both ends of the province, and it's estimated at this point that the basic nutritious weekly food basket would travel about 33,000 kilometers, which is certainly not coming from within Nova Scotia. It also means that a great deal of the outlay that every Nova Scotian has to make for food is actually going to benefit other producers not within the Nova Scotia catchment area. It's worth noting, too, that when we talk about inflation, it is defined in two ways. There's core inflation and there's general inflation. And general inflation is that which talks about the inflation due to energy prices and certain very, very volatile food items, again, tending to be imported ones. And therefore, we are aggressively reinventing Nova Scotia's energy profile. No, at this moment, it is not less expensive than it has been. But it should be noted that as well, the demand for gasoline in the United States has exceeded this year what it has ever come to before. That our energy consumption at 12,000 gigawatt hours a year has barely declined over the last few years, but it has begun to go down in the last 2-3 years. We're no longer a top energy consumer, and perhaps when we're not a top energy consumer, energy costs are not going to be our top concern. Lower Churchill is a project which stands to benefit us by making us much less reliable on the volatility of limited energy resources. And our continued investment in the Clean Tech Fund and in development of tidal energy, which is a resource unsurpassed anywhere in the world, what we have in Nova Scotia, also stands to make us increasingly independent. It's worth looking at some of the employment profiles of some of our more energy dependent, of some of the economies which are more dependent on energy production. And they, at this point, are peaking, whereas those who are involved in renewables are growing in their employment. This is what we talk about when we talk about green jobs. We're looking at this point, Mr. Speaker, to stabilize food prices, gas prices, and energy prices. We're also looking to enable households to control their own costs, and we are looking to enable the taxes which are not, in fact, growing in all dimensions, but we're working to enable taxpayers to have access to services closer to home and at a more sustainable and locally delivered level. And that, Mr. Speaker, is all that we can do for the future, because unfortunately, Madam Speaker, we are unable to change the past. Thank you very much.
Recognize the honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
What does a promise mean to the NDP? Well, the Premier has said in this House that his government has kept every single commitment it made during the last election. Now, one glaring example is he said that we will balance the budget in the first full year of our government. We know that didn't happen. It still hasn't happened. In fact, the NDP are now saying maybe by 2014 it will happen. And, Madam Speaker, I would submit to you that any finance critic worth his salt would have a good understanding of the finances of the province before entering government and would know the state of the province and the government's ability and what they can and can't do in the future. Well, the people might have something different to say the next time, especially when they see that promises that were made were not kept by this government. So, Madam Speaker, the Premier, and I must delve into the provincial budget a little bit. You know, the NDP increased the provincial portion of the HST by 25%. So, Madam Speaker, if there was any amounts, and I know we looked at the universities, that budget was balanced in 2009, but there was an amount outstanding for universities. You know, even if the NDP had increased the HST alone, that would have paid that cost. We've seen the government play with the full-time equivalents, the number of people working in government, with those numbers to try to show a better picture of things. And they had to create a bit of a story, Madam Speaker, because they're claiming they were left with such a mess. We saw them claim a deficit one day and then turn around and claim a surplus the next. We look at the $500 million, $500 million put in to top up the government employees' pension. That's saving the province about $150 million a year right there in the budget. Money that it doesn't have to put in every year. So, Madam Speaker, they're doing it all. And if I may quote George Strait, if you believe that, I've got some oceanfront property for you down in Arizona.
Tucson, as a matter of fact.
So, Madam Speaker, you know, the Premier, before he was the Premier, also promised that the NDP wouldn't raise taxes. On CBC, he was saying, we are not going to raise taxes. But as we know, of course, they raised the HST 25%. And that's one of the biggest sources of income for the province, Madam Speaker. So it means a significant increase in tax revenue for the government. And it comes at a tremendous cost to Nova Scotians. In fact, in the most recent public accounts, it was learned that the NDP has collected more than $650 in taxes from every person in this province, on average, Madam Speaker. So, and they raised taxes under the cover of getting to a balanced budget, yet they had a surplus last year. So, Madam Speaker, can you follow all that? It's difficult. And I have no doubt that it makes Nova Scotians pessimistic and confused about the state of the province's finances. When we have all these promises before an election, we have all these tales of what a mess we've been left in, and then all of a sudden the government has to play with the numbers so it doesn't end up with a surplus. So, and I know that, I mean, everybody caught that. The provincial media was questioning that as well when it happened. And so, Madam Speaker, it's, you can't hide from the numbers. And when people like ourselves on this side of the legislature are taking the government to account on those numbers and there's no response, Madam Speaker, I think it's obvious that this government has failed to keep its promises. So, Madam Speaker, the reason they've added to the tax bill for Nova Scotians is because they've chosen to spend more money. Public accounts shows $500 million more in spending. So the NDP, a tax and spend government, who would have known? So, you know, and we've often heard the government talk about what a mess they've been left in, despite the Auditor General confirming that the previous Conservative government had left them with 8 balanced budgets. You know, well, the spending numbers, Madam Speaker, say it all. They claim that the Conservatives, the Tories, were spending too much, yet they voted, Madam Speaker, they voted for those budgets, or at least some of them. to support that expenditure. And I've brought that before the legislature already, and it's right in the public record, Madam Speaker, that they voted for those budgets. But we also know that they voted against budgets that were designed to bring the province to a balanced budget when John Hamm balanced the budget for the first time in 40 years in 2002-2003. And anybody watching today can go into the records, they can check with our legislative library, and they will see that the record at that time was that the NDP members voted against those balanced budgets. So it's not really a surprise that the NDP would come to the public and say, we're going to balance the budget, and then turn around and tax the people more and spend more. So all this, Madam Speaker, we now have a larger deficit and higher taxes, and now we're starting to lose more jobs in the province. In fact, job losses in the province are piling up by the thousands. And when two of the larger employers in the province, Sobeys and Michelin, came to the Law Amendments Committee recently and said, we do not want first contract arbitration. It will be harmful for us when we go to encourage more investment in your province, because the people that are running those companies have business in other areas as well. This government said, you're being foolish. This government said, we're going to put it through anyway. They didn't listen. So the reality is that the NDP and other promises they've made is they're going to create 2,200 jobs a year. And that was promised in the 2009 election. And the reality is Nova Scotia, latest job numbers show a loss of 6,500 jobs in rural Nova Scotia. So those 6,500 workers are Nova Scotians whose families are facing the hardship of a lost job. Now, the Premier and his Economic Development Minister repeatedly claim Nova Scotia has gained jobs, but statistics show that that is not the case. So, Mr. Speaker, on the job creation front, the government has a long way to go to make good on that 2,200 a year job promise. The NDP party said over and over again, the NDP, the party that said over and over again to seniors, they said this to seniors, Madam Speaker, that they would make life better for them, is making them wait more than 400 days for a long-term care bid in Cape Breton. Their election pamphlet talked about these seniors, and it said too many seniors are forced to travel hundreds of kilometers for care or are left to languish in hospital beds awaiting more appropriate care. And I'm going to table that, Madam Speaker. And I'll save that. I have one more point to make on that, Madam Speaker. So their election pamphlet said they were going to help seniors and specified it as something that they were going to focus on, but yet we have seniors waiting long-term care beds in the province. And 400 days, Madam Speaker, is a long time to wait. The wait list actually is growing longer than it was before this government was elected. They are spending more, but obviously not to help these people in Nova Scotia. The NDP's review of auto insurance rates was promised to ensure the lowest, fairest rates. And after all their bluster and opposition, Madam Speaker, they chose to keep the cap, albeit raised it by a small amount in real terms. And they accepted recommendations that I know I had made myself on this side of the House, Madam Speaker, about taking a look at the diagnostic and treatment protocols in Alberta, and we were happy to see that the government put those into place. So, Madam Speaker, there is one big promise that the NDP are breaking every day, and that is that they're making life better for today's families. And I have to look at the debt, Madam Speaker, because I'm going to table the the NDP, one of the things they had said is that the NDP is committed to ensuring that Nova Scotia lives within its means, and they also said that, the print is small here, but essentially they're saying that they were going to live within their means, and they talked about that the current government was adding a lot of debt. But you know what, one point of information that I had tabled in this legislature, and it's never been refuted, is that this NDP government has added more debt to our province than any other political party in our 250-plus year history. And that was tabled right here in the legislature, And we can look, and the finance minister can look at the debt, the day he took government and the debt we have now, and the amount of debt that the NDP is, it's been tabled and you've never refuted it. So maybe it's time you refute it. But I don't think you can, and that's why you have
Order,
it.
please. I remind the member that the use of you and speaking across the floor to another member is not allowable in the chamber. I recognize the honourable member for Inverness with 45 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I do apologize for breaking protocol there, but so at the end of the day, Madam Speaker, this government is not making life better for today's families. They're making life more expensive for Nova Scotians. It has been an expensive experiment to have this NDP government, and we look forward to the next election when Nova Scotians will get to have their say on whether or not they believe that this government has kept its promises. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's interesting to have to talk about this issue again, the broken promises by the Premier of the NDP government and NDP caucus, and our resolution number 2886. And I'd just like to go through a few of the things that people have been talking to me about, and people are starting to realize exactly what this government has done to the average person. They talked about during the election campaign a better deal for Nova Scotia families. Well, the better deal, I think, has totally crumbled and dashed all the hopes of many, many Nova Scotians, and indeed, as time goes on, most all Nova Scotians will be affected by this, and although they may not be aware of it at the present time. I'm going to go through some of the things here that the government has changed and said that they wouldn't raise taxes, and indeed they have raised taxes in many, many places. More costs for Nova Scotians, costs that they can't afford. And average family today with 2 people working and a couple of children making a modest income simply can't make it anymore. And they're starting to wonder why. You know, they go to the grocery store, the grocery's more expensive. They go to the gas station, the gas is more expensive. Heating, well, however they heat their home is more expensive, whether it's oil or electricity or any other form of heat, it's more expensive. And it's thanks to this government. It truly is. Well, increased the GST by 2 cents. 2 cents, that's 25% on the provincial portion of the GST. That's a significant increase in 1 year. And of course, it's a significant increase because it's on everything. And it's after-tax money people are spending. So it's a huge increase in taxes, just that one swipe. But in addition to that, we have bracket increase, creep in this province. Most people don't know what bracket creep is, but its income tax goes up every year. So your income tax has gone up every year, your GST has gone up, and so have 1,400 user fees. And everybody in this province, one time or another, pays for a user fee. Whether it's your driver's license, your vehicle registration, death certificate, it's a marriage or a birth certificate, anything that we need to have documentation for, because fees have been increased. And in utility trailers, it's went up twice in 1 month, twice the cost. And when I asked the Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations during the budget debate some time ago, he finally admitted, and he's an honest man, he honestly admitted that the finance minister told him to put taxes up, put the price up. I was inquiring to see exactly why this tax had to go on, because it was cost increases. But indeed, we did find out, in reality, it was a tax increase imposed on by the government, a tax increase that was done outside of this chamber, that very finance minister that sits over the NDP benches said it should not be done, unless it was done in this House. Well, it was done outside the House and breaking every rule that they could possibly do. You know, and then we look at the NDP wonders why their gross domestic product in Nova Scotia has been so bad, at 1.9%, the worst in the provincial governments in this whole country, the worst. And if you look why, you can't put your taxes up and put a burden, more and more burden on businesses and people as you move forward, and wonder why the people don't want to work here and businesses don't want to operate here. Well, it's easy to figure out. And when you look at the cost that it goes for a business, and business employ people, and people pay income tax if they're employed. Don't employed, and they stay in the province, it's a burden on the taxpayers that are working. So it's a vicious circle that's started here. And on top of that, the memorandum of understanding that the province had made an arrangements with the previous government to take over some of the costs of corrections and housing and some of the other services that the municipalities and education the municipalities have been paying for directly to the province. To change that, this government canceled it. And they canceled that MOU. And when they canceled that MOU, it meant that the municipalities had to go back to their taxpayers and put property taxes up to pay for this. So if you're wondering why your property taxes have gone up, one of the reasons is this MOU that was canceled by this NDP government. It's just another way of putting your taxes up without having to take credit for putting your taxes up. Just download on the municipalities, and municipalities will just move along and put the taxes up, and we'll be clear of that increase. Another way the finance minister can get away and say, we didn't really put taxes up, your property taxes, but indeed they did. And indeed benefited the result of that property tax going up, although it be in a roundabout way. And I forgot for a long time, as soon as they get in power, they put the price of alcohol up and tobacco up. And that's another tax increase. And that was done outside the budget, or I should say inside the budget, during those things. The cost of food in this province has gone up. Why has it gone up? GST's gone up. Fuel costs have gone up. It was $1 a litre for gasoline when this government took power. I think it's $1.23 today. $1.29 today? $1.29 today for fuel. That's almost 30 cents more per litre. And you talk about the economy, and we're going to compete with the economies outside of here, because reality is, if you're going to make the economy grow in Nova Scotia, you have to bring money into the province from other provinces, from other countries, wherever the place may be. And if you don't do that, you recirculate money. And when you recirculate, you can only recirculate it so many times, and it's ineffective after that, and it really adds nothing to the economy. But if you go into the U.S., which are our nearest neighbor, our biggest trading partner, gasoline right now is running about 82 to 84 cents a litre. 82 to 84 cents a litre. Now just put that in perspective. We're paying $1.29, and our neighbors in Maine and in New England and the rest of the U.S. are paying between 82 and 84 cents a litre. So where is it more competitive for business to work? In the U.S. That's bad news for us, because we have to export to the U.S. And the cost of diesel is very similar. Cost of home heating is very similar. And indeed, we cannot compete with companies in the U.S. that are hungry for work, hungry for business, and really want to do things to make their economies better. So if they can displace something we're shipping in from Canada, that means we lose jobs in Canada. We lose jobs in Canada because of that. We lose jobs in Nova Scotia. So as the economy sort of moves along and everything looks like it's okay, it's really not. We got approximately 12,500 jobs have been lost in this province. And then the government comes along and says this Ships Here program is going to be 11,000 new jobs. And when Mr. Irving was interviewed on the radio station here shortly after they announced that, said, no, it's really going to be 1,200 new jobs. And indeed, the 300 of those jobs are only going to be for a short time. We build a new hangar or new facility to build these ships in, and once that facility is done, which will take about 2 years, 2.5 years, 300 jobs of the 1,200 will be gone anyway, so we're down to 900 jobs. They presently have 1,000 jobs here now. So this shipbuilding contract isn't going to save this province. It's a big help. It's a big help, and I want to congratulate the Irving company for their aggressive approach on this, and indeed got the right to negotiate the contract. That's the right to negotiate the contract. That isn't the contract awarded. That's two different things. And then indeed, after it's negotiated, and hopefully they will get the contract, if the government doesn't change their mind, which they could very well do, you can see they're making serious cuts in transfers to health care. They're making serious cuts in the federal departments. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans announced some major cuts in the staff. And the list is going to go on and on. Are they going to cut the military spending and say, look, we're not going to buy as many ships, we're not going to have as many ships built? What's going to really happen? So this whole deal that the Premier decides he's going to take all the credit for, even though it was very little to do with the province and more to do with the company's proposal, is going to save the province. It's not. It's really not. we got fewer and fewer people looking for work in this province. Down, I believe it's 14,000 people stopped looking for work in the province, stopped. And if you take the 12,500 that have lost their jobs, that's 26,500 people in this province. That's a huge, huge number. And I believe that's all attributed to, or most of it's attributed to, the tax increases, all the other things in this province that have been in place. And I haven't talked about power bills. Power bills in this province, and power is going to go up approximately 10% over just a few months now when it comes into January. That's a huge increase for Nova Scotians to absorb. And with all these things and all these broken promises by this government, I can't see how the people of this province can possibly re-elect many of the members that are over there now. And they will see when they knock on the doors next election that indeed they're going to hear the story, you know, I can't afford to vote for you anymore because you put our taxes up so much. And we can't believe what you're going to tell us for the next election because you didn't keep your promises last time. So it's going to be interesting when the next election comes along to see how the NDP makes out. Hopefully for Nova Scotia's economy and future, they lose the next election. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Recognize the official opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would you please call Resolution 2778?
Call Resolution 2778. I recognize the honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to rise and speak on behalf of this resolution. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly urge Minister of Economic Development and Tourism to start including hard economic targets and measurable outcomes in his strategy and get the people of Cape Breton back to work. This is one, as most of the 51 members, my colleagues, would attest, is one that is near and dear to me in terms of where we are going with our economic development in the province and sort of what our plan is. And what I've been saying is, and basically, and I know that there are lots of people on the government side and on all sides of the House that understand business and they understand sort of the roadmap to getting revenue and getting profits. And I have a sheet here which I'll table, and it's essentially the bones of a business plan. And if you look at what a standard business plan includes, you'll see that having targets and having economic data, hard economic data in terms of how you're going to create jobs and create money is important, and make money is important. The business overview includes things like the nature of the industry, trends in an industry, government regulations, of course, market trends, all those types of things. Another key component, clearly, is human resources. So that's a major component of a business plan. Where are your people? They're your that's your jobs we're talking about. They're the targets. And of course, the most important part, and as far as I'm concerned, is the appendix, which is the financials that go to a business plan. And of course, the financials, financial performance, historical and projected, sales, cost of goods sold. If you're talking about sales, you're talking about cost of goods sold. That significantly and directly represents how many jobs you have, how many jobs you're going to create if you're expanding or if you're a startup. Balance sheet, cash flow statement, financial requirements, performance indicators, and personnel status. So, and I will table that information as part of the business plan. You know, during one of the debates this week, I believe it was the Minister of Community Services had mentioned what I talked about a couple seconds ago with respect to the government side, having people that understand business and may have been entrepreneurs or worked in small business or a medium-sized enterprise, what have you. But the comment, paraphrasing, was there's lots of good people on the government side. Then to those people who understand business and have a feel for the way these things work, I'll ask you a question. How many entrepreneurs you know that went to a bank or the credit union for a loan and didn't have a business plan and actually got money and had some kind of plan for how they're going to make their profits? I would suspect not many. How many expanding businesses get money without this kind of data? When you walk into the Royal Bank or one of the commercial banks or any lending organization, who's getting money if you don't have that information? If you're a large company and you're looking for venture capital, what kind of venture capitalist, what kind of organization would give you money if you didn't have financials, if you didn't have an HR plan to show where you're going, where you're expanding, what kind of things what those numbers are going to look like. Numbers represent a lot of things when you're talking about business and you're talking about economic development. They show growth potential. They obviously show whether or not you're going to survive. And they're an indicator of performance. The numbers, the financials you have, your sales, your cost of goods sold, all these things, whether it's a product or a service, they indicate your performance. And those performance indicators show what your human resources are going to look like. So I don't understand how, if it's an expansion, if it's 1 to 2 people, if it's 10 to 20, if it's 500 to 700, you don't pick a number out of the air. And I listened to the minister's comments about this, and I listened to the department, they presented at committee, and they're great people, very forthcoming with the information, answered it honestly, and it was certainly good information, I think, for all of us that were involved. But the reality is that the response that we got in committee was similar to that of the minister, and it was, we don't want to use a number because we don't want to create a ceiling, or we don't want to use a number because we don't want to, harness ourselves, or we don't want to use a number because then if you don't meet that number, if you fall short by a few, then that becomes the conversation, and that becomes the dialogue. And again, and I think that, many who have looked at business and who get a feel for business, I'd be interested in hearing the Minister of Finance's perspective about this in terms of how you make money and how you establish these targets. For me, and this is, obviously my perspective, you don't just pick a number, then work backwards and figure out how to meet that number. That's not the exercise here. You do your research. Your department and those economic development drivers do the research, and they look at industries, and they look at companies, and they look at what are growth sectors. Then you look at, of course, you look at the core competencies. What are our core skills in Nova Scotia? If you're talking about, is it manufacturing, is it tourism, is it geographic location, is that our strategy? What kind of things will we use to attract business and grow business and support businesses? And then you match our opportunities with those investment options that you have at your fingertips. I mean, that's how we do this. We look at the sectors, we look at what players we can attract, or what sectors are going to expand. It doesn't have to always be a new business, although new money coming in from the province from outside is certainly adds a lot to our GDP, which grows our economy. And those prospective players that will come in, or those prospective players that will expand, they create job targets. They know where their human resources are, and they know what they're going to need. So that's where you get your number. You don't pick it and then shoot for it. It results from the homework that you do developing your economic development strategy. So, and we're talking about $400 million, which is a sizable investment. And the conversations, whether it's the IEF, which was at the time during the Economic Development Committee, going to be the Nova Scotia Jobs Fund, whatever it's called, it's been identified, labeled as a political slush fund, and the specific response with how this money is sort of targeted, or whether or not it's targeted, is there's a certain portion of it that's used for to react, for reactionary purposes. So there's something we need, something that has to be addressed. As far as I'm concerned, that looks a lot like a political slush fund. If there's no targets and there's no strings attached, then I'm not sure what else it is. And this, again, predates the current government, but it's a problem. And I said this in my remarks with respect to the Jobs Fund, and I believe it. I truly do. That we need hard targets, and we have to figure out where this money is being spent, because it's the taxpayers' money. And with all due respect, again, I think that it's using the business community and the business experts we have, and we have lots of them in Nova Scotia, no question. That's our best bet. I don't know if our best bet is to be spending these kind of dollars, with the decisions of politicians. And it's the business people that make this thing drive, and they're all important in our ridings, obviously, and in our respective regions. So I think they're the people we should be listening to. But we have talked about targets, and Bowater has a target. The Premier uses the number of 2,000. Irving has a target, 12,000, give or take. Their numbers, their jobs, they're what we're looking at. New Page, of course, when that time comes, will have targets. That's what we use. That's the yardstick that we use, and I think that for our public dollar investment, that's what we should be looking at. And the NDP government, they had targets as well. They talked about the 2,200 jobs per year. and that's in their platform that the member from Inverness read earlier, and I do have it here and I can certainly table it, but I think we're all aware of it now. 2,200 jobs per year is a target. So where did that number come from? I wouldn't suspect that the government side, while they were running in the 2009 provincial election, made these numbers up out of the air. I would suspect that there was some kind of thought put into it, and they developed based on, it's about a tax, it's a tax credit. So, you know, was that the specific industry? Was that industry specific? What did that 10% tax credit mean, and how would that create 2,200 new jobs? That's the question that I have. So they are targets, believe it or not. And 1 minute left. And I just want to quickly say that the $400 million, these are dire times, and again, it's a majority government. The government certainly does have the tools, the policies, the control of the government engine to make these decisions. And we can look at all the numbers, and we can, you know, look at the employment figures that we think are important. The government can do likewise, but at the end of the day, there are very specific figures that I like to use that indicate our performance, and 1.9% growth is the lowest of any province. Second in the country, second lowest to the Northwest Territories. That's a very definitive number, and that's the one where all of these things that we discuss, all the things that we talk about, are connected to that. So again, for Cape Breton, for all regions of the province, what we need is very specific job targets, and we've got to get there with the public dollars. And with that, Madam Speaker, thank you, and I'll take my seat.
Now recognize the honourable member for Guysborough Sheet Harbour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is my pleasure to rise today to speak about the investments our NDP government has made to grow the economy of Cape Breton. My constituency of Guysborough Sheet Harbour borders the Cancer Causeway, which is the gateway to the island. We share a border, if you will, and we also share many of the same goals and aspirations. Since forming government in 2009, the NDP have focused not only the creation of jobs, but the creation of good jobs, ones that will allow Nova Scotians to work hard and make ends meet, while contributing to our provincial economy. Let's talk for a moment, Madam Speaker, about investments in transportation and infrastructure. In 2009, we saw firsthand the toll years of neglect of roads and highways were having on the safety of Nova Scotians. The Minister of Transportation had the full support of our government to begin strategically planning for paving, spending the time and spreading the asphalt needed to ensure safety for the road users and their families. I'm pleased, Madam Speaker, to be able to share with this House and to recap for Cape Bretoners who may be watching today some of the highlights of the road and paving investments that have created jobs in Cape Breton. Upgrades on the 104 highway in Richmond have smoothed the drive for local commuters and travelers. This was long overdue and the responsible thing to do. The famous Cabot Trail has received much needed attention. Highway 105 and the Big Bedeck Road, Buchanan Bridge, Route 255 and the bridge over McCaskill's Brook. Highway 125 near Sydney is much safer. Route 237, Kenwood Drive and Alexandra Street received a much needed roundabout to safely funnel traffic. And a retrofit to Sydney River Bridge will help folks in Cox Heath and Sydney River drive with ease. But our government did not stop at roads and highways. We realize that many community organizations create good jobs, and investments in their infrastructure allows them to thrive. I am pleased to remind the honourable members of just a few organizations in Cape Breton that have received investments that either created jobs directly or will enable growth in the future. Building a new storage facility and a new three ice sheet building in the Strait Area Community Curling Club, or at the Strait Area Community Curling Club, put Cape Bretoners to work. I was very pleased to represent our government at this ceremony marking this accomplishment. A new multi-use outdoor fitness facility for St. Peter's Lions Club will provide more jobs for people in this area of the island. Renovations to the Strait Regional School Board's Felix Marchand Education Centre and CERIC will also create many hours of employment. Madam Speaker, investments in roads and buildings are only part of the way our government has created jobs in Cape Breton. We've invested in water treatment and sewage treatment for Arichat, Petit de Gras, and we've also put money in the Richmond Arena in Lewisdale, and these will all add hours on the paychecks of Cape Bretoners. More wastewater upgrades and improvements to Main Street in Lewisburg, the Lewisburg Lighthouse Trail and the Lewisburg Old Town Trail all contribute to enhance the capacity for this picturesque community to attract tourists and therefore create more sustainable jobs in this important community. Madam Speaker, creating investments in St. Anne's Elementary, Ocean View Education Centre, Whitney Pier Daycare Centre, Cusack Cornwallis Ashby Complex, Ferris View Elementary School, and Play School Daycare Centre all contribute to a growing economy on Cape Breton Island. But Madam Speaker, I would be remiss not to mention the significant attention and investment made in the Cape Breton and Central Nova Scotian Railway, which will preserve an important part of Cape Breton's infrastructure, securing current and future jobs in Cape Breton.
What party didn't support that?
I have to point out how disappointed I was and our government was when the leader of the third party spoke out against these jobs in Cape Breton. I would like to table this article from the Chronicle Herald in which the leader of the Progressive Conservatives questions an investment in infrastructure that has been in place for generations. And I might add, crosses several areas, including PC constituencies. I also noticed in the newspaper article that the leader of the third party goes on to question the need for a minimum wage. But, Madam Speaker, I digress. It's simply too bad that the leader of the third party couldn't support this investment like CBRM Mayor John Morgan did, Madam Speaker. I would like to table this letter. I would like to table this letter from Mayor John Morgan thanking Premier Dexter and our government for recognizing the importance of this long-standing infrastructure in Cape Breton. It is good to know that Mayor Morgan understands the importance of jobs in Cape Breton.
That's right.
Madam Speaker, like the important investment in CB Rail, support for the YMCA of Cape Breton to grow and expand its community-based programming and services will help employees and community members alike. Helping them to sustain their very own successful businesses through a strategic investment will allow TechLink International to expand its market and its array of products and services. Of course, the remediation of the tire ponds and coke oven sites into outdoor common areas and boardwalks will create jobs from the current concept stage right through to the laying of concrete and later maintenance of the area. Madam Speaker, the items I have discussed today, and I've only touched on a few, are only a few in a much larger list of job creation initiatives. What all MLAs in this House and all Cape Bretoners should be able to surmise from my brief account of Cape Breton job creation investments is that this NDP government is about making life better for families in all regions of the province, Cape Breton firmly included. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I stand here and listen to some of the so-called trophies for the NDP government on the other side that were initially started by opposition governments. He talks about the Central Nova Scotia Railway that the member who preceded me in Cape Breton North fought so hard to keep. He talks about the Sydney tire ponds. If he could find his way to the tire ponds, he'd realize that that tire ponds project was started years and years before this NDP government was in power. It was under a Tory government, and it's federally, provincially sponsored. So to quit that would be suicide, Madam Speaker, for people in Cape Breton. Madam Speaker, the government is failing rural Nova Scotia, and it's failing Cape Bretoners in all aspects of economic development and tourism. Madam Speaker, the minister can stand here and table statements that were read, that were into the paper,
But if you read the rest of those statements, I believe it's in the hopes that Cape Breton will get a few of the economic crumbs from the world-class event that's going to be here in Halifax. Over the last couple of months since I've been elected, I have spoken to Destination Cape Breton personnel, and they have asked time and time again for help to promote Cape Breton, to help promote it directly, not hope to get a few spin-offs. Maybe the rest of the province could get a few spin-offs from what Cape Breton has to offer by bringing people into Cape Breton, and maybe the rest of them then would visit the rest of Nova Scotia. Madam Speaker, we have golf courses, we have beautiful land and seascapes, we have national parks, and we had a train, we just kept it. Madam Speaker, we have one of the most friendly people in the world, and we have the gateway to Newfoundland. Yes, I forgot, they developed that. We should take that and use it, Madam Speaker. Use it to our advantage that maybe we could get some of the people from Newfoundland to stay here in Cape Breton. We don't have a proper tourist bureau in North Sydney. We have an old baby barn type structure with 2 people that sit in there. I don't know how they can even fit in there. Now this year we're even going to cancel that until some of the local politicians, and I believe Mayor Morgan might have been one of them, but I know that the local politicians in my area and myself had to go and get that restored. And that tourist area is not easily accessible. Any tourists coming off the Newfoundland Ferry or going to the Newfoundland Ferry. And Madam Speaker, job losses continue to increase under this NDP government, and they are ignoring that there is a crisis and it's costing families, and it's costing families jobs. They'd like to talk about their Jobs Here program with no specific targets or goals. We've been told just to sit back, get out of their way, and let them go. But that's not our job, Madam Speaker. Our jobs as the opposition MLAs is to make sure that taxpayers' dollars are spent in the best possible way to improve life in Nova Scotia and economic growth in this province, especially Cape Breton. But this is not what we've seen since this NDP has taken office. We have over 15% unemployment in Cape Breton. Not something that those 15% and the rest of Cape Breton is proud of. And we do believe there is a crisis in rural Nova Scotia. Madam Speaker, the Premier and the Economic and Rural Development Minister should be ashamed of themselves. They owe families an explanation why they're not standing up for communities in crisis, why they're not listening to Nova Scotians, especially on bills like 102, and they're not worried about a job crisis in rural Nova Scotia. Madam Speaker, Cape Breton is down over 1,300 jobs in the last year. They haven't made investments in infrastructures like the Celtic Lodge, which they said back in a statement in the spring that if the Lodge didn't have its upgrades, we would lose our trademark. We could lose our branding of these resorts. We've been waiting 2 years now, and it's not in the new plan. And like I said, Cape Breton is down over 1,300 jobs over the last year. And this was before the NDP pushed new job-killing Labour legislation through this legislature. Job creators say that this legislation will do just the exact opposite, that will kill jobs in Nova Scotia and decrease the investment here. Month over month and year over year, Cape Breton is bleeding jobs, and the NDP are continuing to sit on their hands about it. The Premier is even going as far to deny that there is a crisis in rural Nova Scotia, despite evidence to the contrary. Madam Speaker, on November 22nd, when asked by reporters in Halifax about his thoughts about a crisis in rural Nova Scotia, the Premier said, "I disagree that there is a crisis." And I asked the same question in question period to the Minister of Economic and Rural Development, and he agreed with the Premier. But the NDP federal leadership candidate, Paul Dwyer, spoke to the contrary. So that tells me that this government is just out of touch with reality. The people of rural Nova Scotia have to live with this reality every day. Cape Breton has seen nothing but job losses under this NDP government. The businesses that have been harmed by the high tax, high power rate policies of this government are now saying, pretty much unanimously, that the government's new labour laws will hurt this economy. Kicking them when they're down, Madam Speaker. Not helping them to remain viable and improve the business environment. and help them operate in Nova Scotia the way it should be, helping them back on their feet. That's what our government should be doing. And that's what they should be doing to help the business sector. But they are not, and they continue to ignore this. This hurts areas like Cape Breton, and it'll hurt all areas of rural Nova Scotia. In Nova Scotia, there are 13,000 call center jobs. In Cape Breton, where jobs are scarce, they provide skilled labor opportunities in communities that are better off for their presence. Minax and Port Hawkesbury, Stream, and EDS and Industrial Cape Breton are just a couple of examples. We saw with the loss of a call center job in New Waterford did that to the community. 350 jobs gone. 350 people who will not be paying taxes to the province, who will not be spending local this Christmas, and putting back into our economy to help grow. We asked the NDP government, especially the members from Antigonish, Guysborough, Sheet Harbour, and Cape Breton Centre, why push Bill 102 and why now? Why job-killing legislation when nobody asked for it and when no labour unrest exists at the present? Why when so much was at stake? When our province's economy is so fragile and nobody in the business community asks for it or approves of it? It's quite the economic math, Madam Speaker, the NDP are pursuing in rural Nova Scotia. Threaten existing jobs, bring in policies that drive away existing jobs, and replace them with no jobs. When in opposition, the member for Cape Breton Centre said, it's not the type of industry you're going to build your economy around, because people don't aspire to be call centre workers. That was in the Daily News in May 2012. Well, the 350 people laid off in Waterford and the thousands employed in nearby call centres are still waiting for the member for Cape Breton Centre to show us exactly what he and the NDP will do to build the economy around. If there was ever an industry that was globally competitive, it's the call centre industry. There are 13,000 employees, and the sector plays an important role in our economy, with close to $500 million direct payroll contributions. Many young people get their start in a contact centre job, and they are a key part of keeping families in our region. For many families, they are a second income, and for some, they are sole income. The contact center industry is a modern service industry that is comprised of global companies who can easily move their labor to jurisdictions that are more competitive. In law amendments, we heard that one call center, a Fortune 500 company, has 80,000 contact center workers globally, and only 300 of them here in Nova Scotia. In the past, the NDP haven't had good things to say about call centres. One minute they say it's a mugs game, as stated in the Daily News back in 2000. The next minute they say they're hard to replace. So what's the NDP doing about it? Apparently, Madam Speaker, nothing. Rural Nova Scotia is down 6,500 jobs over the past year. Not only are the NDP failing to bring higher paying, more skilled jobs to Cape Breton, now they're actively engaged in lawmaking that risk the jobs that are already there. Bill 102 is said to bring that to the business community. We heard it over and over in law amendments, and we heard it in our office since it's been introduced. That's not economic development, that's economic destruction. The government side says the legislation is not a big deal, but that's not what we heard from people who presented law amendments or businesses in my community, and I know it's the same as businesses in the communities here. They say that this legislation has the risk of a third party coming in and dictating how to run their business. Madam Speaker, those job creators don't want to see that because they don't know the business that they could be coming in to dictate to. It's almost as if they disagree with the presenters who outlined how it could hinder the future investments here. Businesses say if they're not competitive, they run the risk of shedding jobs that will never come back. Jobs that we badly need in rural Nova Scotia. Every single job in rural Nova Scotia is valuable, Madam Speaker. Under Bill 102, first contracts will be arbitrated, and management now assumes the risk of a successful organizing campaign. It takes away any semblance of equal bargaining position for a first contract. Labor-intensive industries like the contact center sector, if faced with higher costs, will simply move. pack up and go where the business climate is better for them to operate in. In closing, Madam Speaker, massive job losses and double-digit unemployment are failing to sway this Premier, as are the businesses that came forward and the thousands of people in Nova Scotia who spoke to us about this industry. He's continuing to deny there is a crisis mounting in Cape Breton, even though 1,300 jobs have been lost in the last year alone. Families in Cape Breton are finding it more and more difficult as time passes. Time is not on our side, Madam Speaker. The economy is faltering because of the NDP's job-killing policies. The vast number of layoffs and closures have been piling up lately. Don't add up to a crisis. That's not what we hear in Cape Breton. We know there's a crisis, and we live with it daily. And Cape Breton is continuing to suffer. And Madam Speaker, we'd like to see that change. Thank you.
I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to offer a few comments on Resolution 2778, and I'll start, Madam Speaker, by saying that this discussion today is actually a reality check on what is really happening in Cape Breton, and that's why the resolution is here, Madam Chair. 15.7% unemployment in Cape Breton is simply not acceptable. It's half that unemployment rate in Halifax, and Cape Breton, the last time I looked, was still a part of Nova Scotia and should be treated equally as all other areas of rural Nova Scotia should be treated. Madam Chair, our biggest industry in Cape Breton now is the export industry. We're exporting people to Fort McMurray on a daily basis. Men and women are going out there to work, and which is causing a lot of stress on families in our area. The only thing good about it is that there is income generated out west that's making its way back to Cape Breton, and that certainly is helpful. But the other interesting fact about my area, the area that I represent and all the areas surrounding that, is that the two biggest employers there are public sector employees, Cape Breton University and the Cape Breton Regional Hospital, both of which employ a tremendous amount of Cape Bretoners in both of those fields, health and education. And I shudder to think where we'd be in Cape Breton with our economy if we didn't have the regional hospital within our midst, with the satellite operations in Glace Bay and Waterford and North Sydney. And also the Cape Breton University has made giant strides in its educational program over the past number of years. Something that we supported very vigorously was the inclusion of a Bachelor of Education program for that university, and so there are a number of students coming into that university from outside, and which are creating to the economy. But that's public sector economy. There's a couple of issues in my area and the area of the other members from Cape Breton that are of grave concern to us, and one is we'd like to see an early resolution to the Donkin mine situation. We'd like to see that mine open as quickly as possible, and I would hope that the government would stop talking about the evils of coal in Cape Breton and start helping us to develop that particular industry, which in effect would take the place of importing coal for the generating stations. It's absolutely ridiculous, Madam Chair, when the government can sit back and rail on about fossil fuels on a number of occasions, and yet it's no problem for them to import coal from in the States and Venezuela and everywhere else, and we have coal sitting in Cape Breton that could be adapted to meet the necessary environmental concerns that anybody would have. And the other issue that, Madam Chair, is that the harbour dredging, and while that's a great project for our area, it's only half the puzzle here. The other half of that puzzle is to attract a book of business to Sydney Harbour, and that's going to require the group, the Laurentian Group, and other business people in the area who are wanting to see that project go forward. That's going to require the provincial and federal governments to help them people out in trying to attract a book of business to that harbour. It's no good for this government and the federal government to invest money in dredging the harbour and then walk away from it. They've got to be actively helping us to pursue business for Sydney Harbour once this harbour dredging is completed. And I know that there are going to be people who are saying, well, you know, you're going to compete against other entities in this province and in the east coast of Canada. But let me tell you that I think in this particular case, the best proposals should get the business, and we in Cape Breton have the lay-down area in Point Edward. We have the rail system down there. We have the harbour that will be dredged shortly. We have all the ingredients there to accept post-Panamax vessels into our harbour and the resulting business that will come from shipping from Sydney to other parts throughout the world. And the other issue that I talk about every chance I get, Madam Chair, is the need to develop the so-called icons, and they are icons in Cape Breton, such as Fort Louisbourg, the Bell Museum, and other like Cabot Trail, Marconi. All of these are left to basically our own devices to try to promote in Cape Breton. When this provincial Department of Tourism, this minister who keeps talking about his job strategy, should be meeting with Cape Breton people about developing and improving these entities in Cape Breton, such as Fort Louisbourg. And I've said it time and time again that we should be developing a business model for Louisbourg. We should be developing a business model that works for the Bell Museum, the Marconi exhibits, and also the entire Cabot Trail area. But that takes more than Cape Breton Tourism can do on their own. It should involve the leadership of this minister and his department to develop those very necessary tourism potentials for our island. And I'll say, Madam Chair, that in my area we have a tremendous number of people who are interested in seeing the island improve, to see the island grow. And I said it in the House the other day, and I'll say it again. I give credit where credit is due, and the equity tax credit that the Minister of Finance has proposed should help people to invest in our community. I just hope that there's a few of them left there to do the investing. But like I say, we have entrepreneurs, and we have great entrepreneurs, and people that could go anywhere else in this world and make their fortune, yet they choose to stay in Cape Breton. They choose to invest their money in Cape Breton, and all they need is for people to realize that and to assist this part of Nova Scotia in growing. The promotion of our area through channels like Tourism Nova Scotia is very important. The promotion of our area from the federal and provincial government in trying to attract a book of business into Sydney Harbour once it's dredged. You know, and people will say, that there's a lot of money gone into the dredging. Sure there is. And I said, that's only half the puzzle. What we have to do when we have the harbour enabling harbour to accept these big vessels, we need to have a reason to have them come into Sydney Harbour. So I would hope that the Department of Economic Development and the Premier's office and the federal government would all step up to the plate here and help Cape Breton develop the Port of Sydney in the future as a result of step number one, which was the dredging. You know, the other thing that I talk about a lot, I guess, over the past few years was the need to relocate, or there is the need to relocate provincial government jobs into Cape Breton. You know, it's been talked about for years, and if there's one area of this province that needs less government intervention, I guess, than any other area, it's the Halifax area. Halifax has a vibrant economy and is growing. And I would be the first to say that if you have a strong capital area, then it should reflect itself in the rest of the province. However, that's not happening here because we're not getting our share of provincial dollars spent in Cape Breton, nor are we getting our fair in terms of some federal initiatives to come into Cape Breton, although we've had some. But I'm always, wherever somebody will listen to me, talking about moving Coast Guard ships into Sydney Harbour, talking about moving perhaps the Department of National Defence, or now known, thankfully, as again by the Royal Canadian Navy, to move some of their vessels into Sydney, because it creates a tremendous amount of local infrastructure and spending of monies from the services needed to service Coast Guard vessels or vessels from the Royal Canadian Navy. Now, you know, that takes a great deal of political will, Madam Chair, and I would hope that someday somebody will see the strength in moving some of the, particularly the Coast Guard. I think perhaps that if there's more of a chance to get the Coast Guard, because the Coast Guard can operate very effectively out of Sydney in the wintertime when they're needed. So, and we see them in there once in a while, but they're not based there. And I would suspect or suggest to you that if we had one or two of them based there, it would make a heck of a difference in our economy, because the infrastructure to support them is there with the Army base in the north end of Sydney and the Point Edward, the old Point Edward Naval Base, which is now run by the Laurentian Group. So there's a number of ways which the public sector can help our economy in Cape Breton. There's also, Madam Speaker, a number of ways which the private sector can be helped to promote our area in the future. And I suggest that, and I'll wind up by saying this, Madam Speaker, that the Department of Tourism has to take a serious look at the kind of icons we have in Cape Breton and engage in a promotion of those particular icons, so that we can at least come to a position where we can compete with other areas of Nova Scotia in terms of attracting tourists to our area. So I would hope that the government will keep those suggestions in mind when they're developing future strategies for Nova Scotia. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the House Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. That completes the official opposition business for today, and I would turn it back to the Government House Leader for government business. Thank you.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, could you please call bills for second reading?
Bills for second reading.
Madam Speaker, could you please call Bill 136, the Members' Pension Review Implementation Act 2011.
I call Bill number 136, the Members' Pension Review Implementation Act. I recognize the Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do wish to speak briefly to the bill. I hear already calls for the question, and so I will try to be concise in my remarks. I did just want to, first of all, take a moment and review how we got to this point, to this specific bill today. Madam Speaker, it was the Speaker's office earlier this year that created the independent commission, the independent panel that reviewed the plan in question. And I did want to point out that that is very much in line with my own thinking about how these things ought to be done, is by an independent panel. And I know that that is what the Speaker went and did, and I just want to acknowledge that that's how we started down this road. Secondly, Madam Speaker, I will draw the attention of members to the bill and the fact that the government has chosen to follow, by and large, the results of that independent panel, the Gruchy report, if I can refer to it that way, in shorthand, but it did deviate in one way, and that is that it removed the provision, which I think surprised some people, that the eligibility for a pension for a member that member become eligible within 2 years. I'd like to think that that was in part because in the PC caucus, we very quickly, on the very day that the panel report was presented to the House and to all members of the public and others, that we were clear that that was a provision that we couldn't support. A month went by before the government and for all parties were able to then speak to an actual bill, but that 2-year provision was removed, and the government has saw fit to remove it. And for whatever reason they did that, I'd just like to say I would like to think that we had some hand in causing that to happen, and I'm pleased that it is out, Madam Speaker. The government, of course, is not perfect in this case, and might as well say it. The Gruchy report also had another recommendation that has not been followed in the case of this bill, and that is that it suggested that the government consider setting up a separate set of accounts for the members' retirement plan. The government has seen fit not to do that. I personally am disappointed that the government hasn't followed up on that part of the Gruchy report. After all, Madam Speaker, it is good pensions governance practice to have a separate set of accounts for pension plans, and this one should be no different. The objective of having a separate set of accounts are ones that seem to me to be worthy of support, and that is that it increases the transparency around the asset and liability position of the plan, so that all of those that make contribution to the plan, which by the way is not only MLAs but also the government itself, or taxpayers through the government, that all those that make contributions to the plan will know that it's in a segregated account and can know with certainty and clarity and full transparency how much a member of the plan puts in and how much the taxpayer puts in. In fact, it's the most clear way to do it, and I guess I am surprised that that's not in the bill, and I remain hopeful that the government will follow up on that part of the Gruchy report and give to all Nova Scotians a separate set of accounts, fully accountable, fully transparent, so that Nova Scotia can see not only what the MLAs are contributing, but what they themselves are being asked to contribute, and whether those contributions are sufficient to match the benefits under the plan or not. Madam Speaker, this is the way that every other pension plan in the province by law is required to operate, and it ought to be the same for this one as well. Madam Speaker, members may have different views on where we go from here. I understand the government wants to see this bill passed. I understand that the Liberal Party wants to see this bill passed. We've certainly given it a lot of thought, Madam Speaker. I've pointed out a few ways that the bill falls short, and I certainly believe that it continues to fall short of where it could have gone. Having said that, Madam Speaker, this bill, the only bill presented to us to deal with the member's retirement plan, is at least a small, modest step forward. It is progress on an issue that has bothered Nova Scotians for many, many years. And so in our party, Madam Speaker, we're not ones to stand in the way of progress, no matter how small that progress may be. And so I just wanted to say, as we speak to the bill and deal with the bill today, that we are going to recognize that it is a modest step forward. It is going in the right direction. It is a sign of progress, and so we obviously support progress when we see it, and then we'll have to leave it to Nova Scotians to decide whether it's sufficient, and my party is already on the record in that regard. And so with those few words, I will take my place and go on with the business of the day.
Question has been called. The question is for second reading of Bill number 136. All in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 136, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 282 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Members Retiring Allowances Act, and to amend Chapter 1, 1992 Supplement of the Revised Statutes 1989, the House of Assembly Act.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We should now leave the chair in the House of Health and the whole House on bills.
Carried. The Committee of the Whole House on Bills will come to order. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, could you please call Bill 133, the Bowater Mercy Pulp and Paper Investment Act?
I call Bill number 133, the Bowater Mersey Pulp and Paper Investment Act. Recognize the Clerk.
Madam Chair, Bill 133 was referred back from Law Amendments Committee with one amendment. It has 17 clauses, and subsection 6.1 was amended in committee by adding the following words at the end: and lands of Mi'kmaq interest. That was the only change, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Shall Clause 1 carry? Shall the remaining clauses carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? Carried. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Madam Chair, seeing no other bills we want to do today. Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, could you please call Bill number 129, the St. Michael's Polish Association Benefits Society?
Call Bill number 129, the St. Michael's Polish Association and Benefits Society. I recognize the Clerk.
Madam Chair, Bill 129 has 6 clauses and was referred from the Private and Local Bills Committee without amendments.
Thank you. Shall Clause 1 carry? Now I recognize the Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's an honor to be in my place here today. Oh, I don't know if it's been that long since I stood at a desk here on the floor of the legislature, Madam Chair, but it's an honor for me to stand here today on Bill 129, an act to amend Chapter 236 of the Acts of 1912, an act to incorporate St. Michael's Police Association and Benefits Society. The St. Michael's Police Association and Benefits Society was founded in 1909. It was incorporated by an act of the legislature in 1912. In fact, the act received royal assent on May 3rd, 1912. This is significant because May 3rd is the official holiday for the Poles and people of Polish descent around the world. On May 3rd, 1791, Poland adopted a modern parliamentary constitution. Unfortunately, Poland was partitioned 4 years later and did not regain its independence until 1918. The occupation and the hopes for a better life played a role in the early Polish settlement in industrial Cape Breton and the area of Whitney Pier. The Society is the oldest still operating Polish community service organization in Canada. It even gets better. It is proudly based in the historic multicultural community of Whitney Pier, a distinctive and vibrant part of Sydney. As my honourable colleague from Cape Breton South would know, a very distinguished area of Sydney. Anybody famous come from Whitney Pier? That's for another day. In the early years, most of the society members were steel workers, men who endured appalling and very dangerous working conditions, mainly in the open herd and the blast furnace sections. For these Polish pioneers, society functioned as a kind of safety net, paying benefits in the event of illness, injury, or death. The first president of this very energetic society, Stanislaw Guzewicz, immediately after it was founded, the society set out to build a hall at Victoria Road and Wesley Street. The society also successfully petitioned the Diocese of Antigonish for a designated
a Polish parish, which was established in 1913. The St. Mary's Polish Parish exists to this day and will soon mark its 100th anniversary in 2013. And as I think about that historic church in 100 years, I think about a gentleman, my next-door neighbor, Joanne Cattrack's father, Stan. Stan Cattrack worked in the mills in the steel plant, but Stan was an avid carpenter. Never took a trade, but he could build the paddles for the bakery. And today his woodwork still is in that church. That woodwork and the case that he built when Pope Paul came here and blessed that for the Polish people of Whitney Pier, that work is still in that church today. And Stan did a lot of woodworking in the area. And, you know, his wife, Margus, is still alive today and very big part of the Polish community of Whitney Pier. You know, the Society first hall was replaced in 1950 by the current hall at Victoria Road and Jameson Street. It is known as the Polish Village, or simply the Polish Village. That happened under the Society's longest-serving president, Joseph Misinich, a tireless community organizer. The Society's hall is also headquarters for the Porgia Polish Folk Ensemble, the only Polish dance and community theater group in Cape Breton. The Society's hall is presently undergoing renovations thanks to the spirited grassroots community fundraising effort, as well as the provincial and federal funding support. And I'd like to thank my colleague in the legislature, the Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism, providing the necessary funds so we could rebuild that hall and redo that hall. Over the years, the Society has helped immigrants to settle in the Pier. It has sponsored sports teams, bands, and scholarships. It was built bridges to other cultural communities, and it fits very well into the Pier mosaic. Now, I must talk about the Pier ball field. When they talk about the ball field, it was a ball field that I grew up in my neighborhood, and the name of the ball field was the St. Mary's Ball Field, and that was built by the Polish community. And I know that I know as I speak today, the honourable member from Cape Breton South would know this, because he coached Little League and played at that ball field, Madam Chair. And that ball field had all the kids in the neighborhood went to play ball there since we were kids. And, you know, a bunch of kids come out of that neighborhood and then formed a ball team called the Pier Junior Aces. And went on to become the Nova Scotia ball champs in that little old neighborhood down there. And we also had a rink down there. We had an outdoor rink. It's where the substation now sits presently in Whitney Pier. And we would go down and put on our skates and play hockey there till all hours. And you know what? The reason we could play hockey there so long was because we could play hockey late into the evenings, because when they were pouring metal into the open herd, it lit up the rink. That's how close the rink was to the open herd. So we could play late in wee hours. Our parents would come to get us to bring us home as we played down there. But also, you know, I remember saying this at that St. Mary's, the Polish community built that rink down there. And at one time we had 3 shoemakers in the pier. We had Harry the Bull, Steve Dilney, and Carluke Hashik. And they actually, the shoemaker, Steve Dilney's shoemakers were the Pier Pizza Palaces now. And she was Mrs. Hashik. So Mrs. Hashik, her father owned a store in the community of Whitney Pier, and that store was called Haliburta's store. And everybody in the neighborhood went to play ball or went to play hockey. We shopped at that store. It was Mr. Haliburta, and his daughter was married to Steve Dilney, the shoemaker. And the joke used to be that we had 3 shoemakers at Whitney Pier because everybody's skates got so dull from all the ore dust falling on the ice all the time. But we enjoyed that part of skating there. It was a beautiful place. But not only that, in that neighborhood, everybody had a garden across the street. They had chickens, they had a garden, they grew their own vegetables. Now you could live within 200 feet from the open herd and the blast furnace, and you're eating vegetables and you're eating stuff in that garden. And today I'll tell you, Madam Chair, that the people in that community, the widows, the people who lived there, loved that community. They grew their own vegetables. They went door to door with lettuce and radishes and cucumbers, and I would see the people picking dandelions and make dandelion salad. well, it might a little bit of dandelion wine. But if you want to talk about wine, I guess I could talk about, you want to talk about Polish, you want to talk about the Polish, there was a fellow by the name of Sam Shalak, and Sam Shalak made the best cherry wine. He was of Polish descent, and he himself made beautiful, beautiful Polish wine. His children, Bernie Shalak, Louise, Florence, and Michael. So that community has lots of memories in there. Over the years, society, in 2009, the society donated its record dating back 100 years. They donated that record to the Beaton Institute at the Cape Breton University. These records are a treasure trove of information on the early Polish community in this province and on the Whitney Pear community itself. With the pro bono support of the facility and the staff at Cape Breton University, the Society recently completed a strategic plan. It is a practical, achievable plan focused on enhancing cultural programming in Whitney Pear. The Society is not only rejuvenating the hall, but is rejuvenating itself. It has adopted new bylaws to modernize its operations and its membership structures with emphasizing its cultural activities. This proposed bill is a part of that modernization, but also that commitment to a long and proud heritage. The key features of the bill. For the first time, an act will make reference to the preservation, promotion, and understanding of Polish culture and heritage in Cape Breton as being central to the mandate of the Society. This reflects a reality on the ground. It is the culture at work and the operation of the community hall that has eclipsed the old core function of paying benefits to its members. But a person will not have to actually be of Polish descent to be a member, as it implies in the outdated language of the old act. What counts is that his or her commitment to the culture and to the work of the Society, and that's an important piece of this act that we discussed today. I wore the Polish tie in this legislature 3 years ago. I borrowed that tie off a gentleman by the name of Larry Genevak. I gave it back to him. But it's funny because I would watch his father, Dominic Genevak, and Mickey Perush walk down for the Society meters. Dominic Genevak and Mickey Perush and those men. And I'll table a little document today here this morning. I'll table this. And I'll table this here document as in this picture I'm going to table today is a picture of two people that came to the Private and Local Bills Committee. It's Bernie LaRusick and Tom Urbaniak. You'll see by the picture that I'm tabling today, they have their St. Michael's Polish Benevolent Society jackets and ties on. And that's a very important part of today's culture for that community.
And who's in the background?
In the background, we have some members. I'll name them all if you want me to here, but, you know, but I won't do that at this present time. And I thank the honourable member for Cape Breton West for emailing me that picture because I wasn't here yesterday. I was busy doing the melting pot in Whitney Pier yesterday. And those of you who would like to check the front page of the Cape Breton Post today, you'll find out what went on at Whitney Pier yesterday. You know.
Order, please. I just want to remind the member that the use of "you" is not permissible in the chamber. For Cape Breton Nova.
I would thank the Honourable Madam Chair for reminding me of that. The reference to the Society's bylaw requiring the approval of the Governor and Council will be removed. The Society will henceforth be required to file its bylaws and any amendments to the bylaws with the Register of Joint Stocks. And that follows with all nonprofit organizations in the province of Nova Scotia. There is a reference in the bill to being proclaimed on or before May the 3rd, or else taking effect that day. That is there for a reason. It will be exactly 100 years after the first act. It would coincide with the Polish Day around the world and would be a chance to celebrate the recent renovations to the Society's Polish Village Hall in Whitney Pier. And please note that the inclusion of Polish text alongside the English, an act of incorporation as amended, is provided a schedule in Polish. Some of the Polish names in the first section of the schedule, names that have been anglicized in 1912, are shown correctly in the brackets. This is the first time in